Welcome to Open Tables. With your hosts, Cynthia Sue Larson.
But it's okay for everybody to change. It's okay to let things go. And that's really powerful.
Christopher Anatra.
The universe is based on commerce. You know me as the quantum businessman.
Jerry Hicks.
I feel like I've woken up in a parallel dimension where everybody's exactly the same. They look the same memories generally speaking, but they're different.
And Shane Robinson.
Nobody has all the answers, so everybody's welcome to share their ideas, and it really expands our consciousness when we do that.
Open Tables. Unique perspectives for a new view of reality.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. For those that don't know, my name is Jerry Hicks, also known as the Dark Wolf, and I am the father of the International Mandela Effect Conference. It is my honor to welcome you to this extremely special episode where we welcome an incredible guest to talk about Mandela Effect VR. And I know you guys probably thinking this is something to do with feet. If so, I do apologize. But we are going to be talking about Tom's big toe. That will make a little bit more sense, a lot more sense here in just a moment. But before we get started, we need to go ahead and pull on our rest of our board members and team here at International Mandela Effect Conference. Our president, Miss Cynthia Sue Larson. Our vice president, you know him as the quantum businessman, Mr. Christopher Anatra. Our secretary, you know him as unbiased and on the fence, Shane Robinson. Ladies and gentlemen, I am proud to introduce our International Mandela Effect Conference team for this episode. Also, before we get started, we need to go ahead and run through a quick disclaimer of information just so we can get this part out, legalese out of the way. The content you are about to watch is meant for thought and consideration. There's going to be some deep thought in today's episode, I assure you that. Please be respectful of each other and opinions shared. This is a safe space to express thoughts, ideas, and information. Please note that no copyright infringement is intended with regard to inclusion of short excerpts of material that are all included in accordance with fair use under Section 107 of the Copyright Act. With the legalese out of the way, ladies and gentlemen, we have with us tonight, of course, Mr. Tom Campbell. Tom is a very, very distinguished physicist. A list of things here, so bear with me. If I read his whole bio, we wouldn't have time for the rest of the show, so I'm just going to hit some high points here. He has a BS degree that he got in 1996, Bachelor's of Science in both mathematics and physics. He was president of his fraternity and chief justice of the college's student court. He received a master's degree in 1968 in physics. After his work commenced in a PhD program with a specialization in experimental nuclear physics. He had then worked as an analyst with the Army Technical Intelligence for a decade before moving into R&D of technology in supporting defensive missile systems. He has excelled as a working scientist, a professional physicist dedicated to pushing the frontiers of cutting-edge technology and still yet of cutting-edge thought. And then for 20 years subsequently, he worked at the heart of developing the U.S. missile defense systems for the DoD. After formally retiring there, now this man has already done enough for one last time, but that wasn't good enough for Mr. Campbell. After formally retiring there, he most recently worked as a consultant for NASA in the Ares 1 program, which was the follow-on to the classic shuttle program we all grew up with. He then began researching altered states of consciousness with a name you guys might recognize in the chat, Mr. Bob Monroe. Monroe Laboratories in the early 70s, he was instrumental in helping get this off the ground and the work done there. For the past 30 years, his overlapping career in physics has been focused on scientifically exploring the properties, boundaries, and abilities of consciousness, which really brings me back to the first talk I gave at the conference, which was about consciousness being a underlying idea of everything. I may not have been too far off the mark. We'll see today. From 1985 to 1995, Tom served as a member of the board of directors for the Monroe Institute. During this time, he continued his earlier research, began collecting and pulling together in 1995 to 2002, and formalizing the result of his consciousness research, focusing experimentation on the remaining problems and writing down what he had experimentally determined to be fundamental characteristics of a larger reality. In 2003, he published My Big Toe trilogy, which represents the results and conclusions of his scientific exploration of the nature of existence. And 2003 to present, he's still talking about these amazing truths in which he was able to determine. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor and pleasure to welcome our guest, the one, the only distinguished physicist, Tom Campbell, to the show. Tom, welcome, my friend. What a list of achievements you have done, my friend.
Thank you very much. That was quite an in-depth introduction.
Well, like I said, if I went off what I originally had, I'd still be talking for the next 5 minutes. You have accomplished a whole lot, and I'm just going to go ahead and basically give the floor to you, sir, and let you present your information as best you can. Ladies and gentlemen, Tom Campbell.
Okay, well, I think toward the end we're going to talk about the Mandela Effect a little more directly. So I'd like to just give the viewers or listeners just a little bit of, we already see who I am from the bio, but, what I bring to the table here as far as the discussion goes. Yeah, I, like most people who get into the mode of being seekers, looking for the truth, trying to figure out how do things work, why are things the way they are. I started with a paranormal experience, which is where most of us start, I think, who become seekers. We have some sort of an experience. We can't explain it. We know it was real, and we start to research. We start to dig. We start to wonder and experiment. And I started the same way. I was in graduate school, and I took a course in transcendental meditation. Right. And it was a special $25 for college students. So I took my banana, and got my mantra. And for the first time, I meditated, and I found it very easy. I took to it very, very quickly. And about 3 months later, I found, just by circumstance, happenstance, that I could debug computer code in my mind while in a meditation state. And what I mean by that is I could look at the code and I could see the lines of code, coming down like from a printout. And the ones that had errors in them were red. The ones that were normal were black. So that surprised me. So I looked at this and said, well, that's interesting. I wonder if that's going to work. And I went up to my, this is the old days, my box of, 5,000 punch cards and looked through all those punch cards. And sure enough, those lines of code that showed up red had problems with them. Now, back in those days, that's amazing, because one computer for an entire university, that computer probably was about a tenth as powerful as most people's cell phones today. You got maybe one run in a week because you had to get in the queue. So if you wasted your week because you didn't put a semicolon at the end of the statement, well, there's a whole week gone. So debugging code was not like it is today, where you go into debuggers and it tells you what's wrong. And, it's a fast interactive process with the computer. It wasn't like that at all. So this was very important discovery on my part, that I could find these errors in code. And sometimes the error wasn't mine. Sometimes it was a punch error. The machine that punches the punch cards would, with time, it would get off a little bit, and the hole wasn't exactly where it was supposed to be. But the system in those days didn't have debug software. It just threw the job out and said, this job failed, period. That's all you got. This job failed, and nothing else came out. So, trying to track down a hole punch error that's only 1/10 of a millimeter out of line and you can't see with your eye may take you 3 months, in your research.
It was next to impossible at those times with the equipment that was available then.
Yeah. It was so you have to, debugging software today is like, yeah, okay, well, so what? Not a big deal. But back in those days, your ability to do this and do it well was very important. So I got this huge leg up that I could get this done in moments, and it worked. So that was my really paranormal experience that got me opened my mind. Up until that time, like most physicists, I had the idea that if you couldn't measure it, it didn't exist. Or if it did exist, it wasn't significant. It wasn't important. It was irrelevant.
Known as the materialist point of view, right, sir?
That's the materialist point of view. Yeah, that's generally the way most scientists, materialists, I guess, in general, think. When I may measure, I don't necessarily mean you stick your yardstick next to it. I mean you have to interact with it somehow. Whether it's with your tool or with your microscope or whatever it is, you have to interact with it somehow. And then that measurement is what actually gives you a sense of that it's real. Because if you can't interact with it, there's nothing you can do to interact with it, then it's like pink elephants that fly at night and, do magical things. If you can't interact with it, then it's couldn't possibly be real. Well, I changed my mind rather drastically after I started decoding, software in my mind. And suddenly I had this idea, wow, what a physicist does is that they model reality. That's a physicist's job. So I just suddenly realized there was a whole lot more to reality than I thought, because there was nothing physical here. There was no measurement being taken. There was nothing that you could put in a box or weigh or measure or look at with any kind of a machine. And yet it was real and it was significant. So at that point, I started being a searcher, a seeker, started reading and looking to see if I could find something that would help me understand what happened. Well, one thing happened to another. I ended up getting my first job working in technical intelligence, as you mentioned. And my boss tossed Robert Monroe's first book at me and said, "Hey, Tom, what do you think of this?" And I thought, well, if this guy's just trying to sell books, he's really got something going. But how do you know? How can you tell that it's legitimate? It's just there. So that's kind of where I left it. It was interesting if it's true, but how do you know it's true? So a couple of months later, my boss found out that Bob Monroe was only about 45 minutes up the road from where we lived and worked outside of Charlottesville, Virginia. And we all made an appointment to go see him. And a whole bunch of us went out to see whether this guy was a hustler selling books or whether he had something real going on. And it turns out while I was there and met Bob, and indeed he was not a hustler, he was the genuine thing. And he had just built this lab for studying consciousness, but he didn't know what to do with it. He didn't have any equipment in it. He didn't have people in it. He had no idea, but his, it's that like that old movie, build it and they will come. It was that sort of thing. He just built it knowing that that's what he was supposed to do. So myself and Dennis Menerick, an electrical engineer, we said, "Hey, we'll man your lab. We'll do the work. We're interested. But the deal is, you teach us what you know. Teach us to go out of body, because if we only study you, then it's all not real for us. It's not real until you experience it yourself. Like I say, if it's not your experience, it's not your truth." And
everybody in this chat room listening right now can fully agree with that. And until you experience something, till you see it, you can think all day, but you don't know it's real until that personal experience, for lack of a better term.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely essential. Well, Bob was a good teacher, and within 6 months, a year or so, Dennis and I both were going out of body, kind of on demand. And I started doing research there. Well, how do you do research as in and out of body? Well, the same as the way you do research any place. we were doing everything evidential. Matter of fact, we were only doing things that were evidential because other things other than evidential really didn't matter too much to us. So we were remote viewing, we were healing, we were getting information out of databases. Some people call that Akashic records, but we'll just call those databases. We were doing all of these things and then checking them to see if we got it right. Was this real information or was it just something we made up? Well, after, a while, I got to where I could reproduce my mental state, my altered state and out of body pretty precisely. I could do the same thing every time. So there wasn't a lot of fluctuation on my end. So I could start doing research, change this variable. And how does that change the result? Change this variable. Does it make you better at it or worse at it? Change another variable and hold the rest constant. So that's what I mean.
Once you learned the concepts and started practicing personally, you were able to manipulate the concepts and actually be able to play with it a little bit, right?
Right. That's it. So now I spend the next 35 years doing this, just doing research, manipulating it, playing with it, seeing what works and why does it work. Well, okay, I can do this sort of thing and it works, but what if I approach it differently? What if I change the variables a little bit? How does that affect it? And what happened is that after about 35 years, I thought I understood how consciousness worked, because this really was all about consciousness. So I published these books, My Big Toe, My Big Theory of Everything, and it started out just to be a model of consciousness. But I knew one of the facts that I had learned in my work inside consciousness is that consciousness is fundamental. That was a fact. And I had developed a whole set of these consciousness facts. This is a fact of the way consciousness works. And I had a whole set, of course, of material facts too, because I'm a physicist. So that was part of my job. So I was looking for this overall explanation or understanding that would allow me to come up with one overall theory. We call that a theory of everything, that could explain both sets of facts, the consciousness facts and the material facts.
Well, let me ask you really quickly, based on materialist POV. The quantum physicists say if you understand quantum physics, you don't understand quantum physics. Is consciousness about the same way? If you understand consciousness, you don't understand consciousness?
No, it's not. Consciousness you can understand pretty clearly if you do enough experimenting with it. If you can do enough research, then consciousness does not remain kind of mystical like quantum physics does. Now, the reason it turns out that quantum physics is kind of mystical and people don't understand it, the thing I think you were quoting that if you think you understand quantum physics, you just don't understand quantum physics yet. That's the idea. But anyway, what I found was that this overall theory, which started as just a model of consciousness, turned into a general theory of everything, including physics and quantum physics. So now I was able to take this overarching concept that started as my model of consciousness, and from that, I could derive from first principles quantum physics, relativity, and my quantum physics was logical. It wasn't mysterious. You could understand it. You didn't have to shut up and calculate, as Feynman said. You could just look at the logic and logically deduce the answer without a lot of math, because quantum physics isn't weird science. Science isn't weird. Quantum physics seems to be weird because we don't understand why and how it works. And we don't understand it because we have the wrong perspective. You can look at something with the wrong perspective, and it's just never, there's just no answer. Like people did when they thought that the Earth was the center of the universe. Well, that made sense. They saw stars and the moon, and everything just seemed to circle the Earth. And, if everything circled the Earth, then obviously the Earth is at the center. I mean, it's perfectly obvious. That's true. And it took, centuries and centuries before the paradigm shift came that, oh, no, that's not the case. We circle around the sun. And the sun is just moving wherever it goes. It's circling around in a big kind of pinwheel shape in a galaxy. And, we had this totally different viewpoint. And these big paradigm shifts are hard because you have to see reality in a different light, a different viewpoint. And that's been the problem that physics has had. They've just had the wrong perspective. And from the perspective they have, from the beliefs that they have, yes, physicists have their perspective based on belief. The answer just doesn't exist. It just looks like weird science. But once you understand it, it's not weird at all. It works. It's rational. It's rational science, just like every other science.
I apologize, sir. In your work, you actually build off what you call Einstein's little toe. Is that correct?
Yeah. Well, Einstein kind of produced this concept of a theory of everything. And where he was that we had at that point quantum mechanics, and we had, which was Newtonian mechanics was a subset of quantum mechanics. So we had quantum mechanics, and then we had relativity. And those two kind of answered most everything we knew about the physical world. They seemed like really good theories, but they were philosophically at odds with each other. They did not agree on the basic nature of the underlying reality. So what that told us is that there was something else above that, some bigger understanding from which you could derive both. And that was called a toe by Einstein. So what Einstein wanted to do was unify quantum physics and relativity into just one understanding. And that was going to be the understanding of the physical world. I call that a little toe because it's only about the physical world. I wanted to understand everything material and physical and everything consciousness, everything that's non-material, everything that is intuitive rather than intellectual. So my toe basically can derive everything and explain everything in the objective world, the physical world, but it also equally well explains everything in the subjective world. So for instance, if your life is, miserable and you constantly are struggling, well, this theory will explain why that is. So, that's the inside stuff. So it explains all the outside stuff in the outer world. It explains all the inside stuff going on in your head. By explain it, I mean, it explains the motivators, what creates what, it's basically a science of the subjective world as well as a science of the objective world. So now when I got to that point that I realized that, I could explain quantum physics like physicists can't from this new perspective, and that I could explain relativity in ways that physicists can't. Physicists don't know why the speed of light's a constant. That's just an assumption on which relativity is built. But they don't know why that is. There's no reason for that. But my model, there's a very obvious reason why that has to be. So in any case, I came up with a couple of quantum physics experiments. Now, these are just science experiments. These aren't experiments that have anything to do with consciousness directly. But these experiments, I have 5 of them, are just fundamental quantum physics experiments. And I make some predictions that are totally impossible to happen. It's much like the double slit experiment. Now, I'm not sure whether you're all aware of that, but you probably are. It's kind of a big thing. And the double slit experiment, something impossible happened. They sent particles through, shot particles at a double slit, two holes in a background, and they expected the particles to pile up behind each hole. That's what particles do, travel in a straight line, unless acted on by some outside force. It's one of Newton's laws. So what happened instead is that these particles rearranged themselves in an interference pattern. on the screen. Okay, that was the result. And there was no reason they should do that. There was no external force, but they rearranged themselves in an interference pattern. And that was just impossible. So that is when quantum physics got weird. Actually, that's when quantum physics really got invented. And of course, their solution was that there are no particles. There's only protoparticles. There are only probability of a particle being someplace. And the measurement of that place, or trying to measure that particle, is what brings the particle into physical existence. And that's why quantum physics is weird science, because it has that weird idea that particles, the physical world, doesn't exist until the measurement is made. That's what creates its existence. So that's weird physics. But these experiments are going to do more things that are impossible. It's going to allow people to say how what direction does a particle fly off of a radioactive source. It's going to predict it before it actually comes off. That's impossible. It's going to predict that when a photon hits what's called a half-silvered mirror, or a beam splitter is another word for it. That's a device that when a photon hits it, it has a 50-50 chance of either reflecting or of transmitting, going through it. And it's just a property of that material. And I have some experiments that will let me predict, before the photon ever gets to that beam splitter, whether it will reflect or whether it will transmit. Well, that's completely impossible. So what this does is shows that the material world adjusts itself to suit what needs to happen, to suit the constraints that are placed on it. And having a material world that can modify itself, well, that can only happen one way. And that's if we have a virtual reality, a computed reality. And that works perfectly with modern science, because modern science has come to the understanding that our reality is not physical, but it's information-based. Information-based is just a code word for calculated, which is a code word for simulated, which is a code word for virtual reality. So all these things really mean the same thing. So we kind of know that that's the way the world is. Quantum mechanics tells us this is an information-based reality. And most new physicists, modern, I should say physicists less than 60 years old or less than 50 years old, they pretty much agree with that. The old guard still kind of hangs on to its old ways of thinking. Reminds me of a statement that Planck said. He said, progress in physics moves forward one funeral at a time, meaning that until the old guard kind of moves on, it's hard to change ideas. Well, that's just the same concept, that to change the way you think about the world and reality is a hard thing to change. It's just not easy to shift major paradigm like that. So anyhow, so I have these experiments, and what they will do, I have them working now. There's one being done at Cal Poly in California, and I have another one done at another major university. I can't tell you where, because I had to sign a contract that said I would not say about it, because these guys are real physicists, and they don't want to be caught in public doing stuff that has something to do with consciousness.
Right.
It would ruin their reputation. So that C word, that consciousness word, is anathema to physicists, because they say physics is about objective reality, period. That's what physics does.
Right.
Consciousness is not objective reality. That's subjective reality. Physics doesn't do subjective reality. It only does objective reality. So, I got to stay away from that. Otherwise, my peers will start calling me names and saying I'm doing woo-woo physics, and it's bad for the reputation. What they don't understand, of course, is that consciousness is the source. Consciousness is the fundamental thing, and physics is a subset of that. So
So
I guess,
now that we've got a good basis, a good foundation from where we're coming with this model, amazing, by the way. And I fully agree with you. Consciousness being the most fundamental, not the particles or what they consider particles, waves. We could go for hours on that. As for those that don't know, if you haven't checked out Tom Campbell's work before, ladies and gentlemen, I would definitely suggest you do check it out after this. Preferably wait till after the show. Tell us, Tom, what is a larger consciousness system?
Okay, well, larger consciousness system actually is a metaphor, and it's a metaphor for source. And it's the source of everything. It's the source of us. We are pieces of consciousness. We are individuated units of consciousness, just a subset of this larger consciousness system. Now, this consciousness system is conscious. It's not just a machine, it's conscious, it's aware. And it also is an information system, because that's what consciousness is. Consciousness is awareness. And you say awareness, well, awareness of what? Well, that's information. The what is I'm aware of that. Well, that is describable in information. What is that? Well, you describe it. So consciousness is an information system. Now, all information systems, or let's put it this way, all systems that can change themselves, all systems that are self-changing, evolve. They change. They optimize themselves. They constantly are trying to optimize with the constraints that they have to work with, like in biology. Okay, we evolve. The constraints are survivable and procreation. Two things. If you can't do those two things, you're going to go extinct. You're done. So we keep optimizing around those things, and that's true whether you're a butterfly, or whether you're a human being. Things change. We have, kind of random events sometimes happen in the biology, because biology is a hugely complex system. And if that change helps you better procreate or survive, then you go forward. If it makes it harder for you to procreate and survive, well, then you stop. You don't go. So this is just basic evolution. Now, consciousness is like anything else. It's a self-changing system. It's aware of itself. It is, and it can change itself. So it evolves. Now, it's an information system. So how it evolves is by lowering its entropy. Now, entropy is maybe a big word for a lot of people, but entropy is really a measure of disorder. So let me start with a system of bits, just a system of bits. Bits are the smallest piece of information. If all the bits are random, then there is no information in that system, because all the bits are random. They don't mean anything. Now, if you order some bits, you order them, and you can, once you order those bits, you can make that order in a symbol for something. It has meaning, has significance. Now you've created information. So you've taken complete disorder, randomness, created a little order, and you create information. So an information system evolves by lowering its entropy. That is, by creating information, by creating order. And it's not just any kind of order, it's creating order that has significance, that has meaning. So this information system is conscious, it's consciousness. It evolves by lowering its entropy. And it would take me about 20 minutes to explain this, but maybe you'll just accept it. And that is the optimal lowering of entropy, the optimal way to lower entropy within a social system. And the system is a social system because one of the things it did is it made us subsets of itself, just chunks of consciousness. So we have a system, but it's just one big monolithic thing. And one big monolithic thing can only do so much. It only has certain possibilities. It's limited by one thinking process. So it realized that the way to evolve more is to break itself into pieces of other things with free will that it could interact with. Now the possibilities go up. There's lots of different things that can happen now. That turned it into a social system. So consciousness became a social system. It had the, we, individual units of consciousness, and the larger conscious system are all really parts of the same thing. We're pieces of that system. So in this social system, you lower your entropy most effectively through cooperation. That should be kind of obvious. Cooperate. You have a whole bunch of people in a social system. If they cooperate, they can do more than if they don't cooperate. Okay. Caring. If they care for each other, if it's they're looking out for each other, then the system can do more than if they're all just out for themselves and trying to push the other person down so they can get an advantage. Okay. So being cooperative, being caring, being considerate.
Would it be fair to say, and I think you've quoted this at least once, that love lowers entropy?
Right. See, that's the thing. So love, I call all of those things on the little love side, right? The cooperation, the caring, compassion, all that's on the love side. The opposite to love is fear. On the fear side, fear makes one self-focused. When you're you're afraid for you. You're afraid that things aren't going to be the way you want them to be. People won't be the way you want them to be. Situations won't. So it's a very self-focused kind of thing.
That's one of those things that when you first said it a few years ago, it was like a light bulb went on for me, Tom, because you said, what if everybody on the planet was looking out for you and you were just looking out for everyone else on the planet? Then you wouldn't have to look out for yourself. And I was like, wait a minute. It was like that light bulb moment. You know what I mean? Because then you realize, like, oh, if everybody was looking out for me, then yeah, I wouldn't, then I could just look out for everyone else I encountered, and you'd have this perfect system where, you wouldn't need locks on doors and stuff anymore, would you?
Absolutely. You see, that's the idea. We think about a system where it's kind of a collective system where everybody wants to help everybody else. And we say, well, that'll never work. It's just never going to work. Well, the reason we say that is because we come from a system based on fear. That's where we live. And we can't imagine it being any other way. So we figured, well, as soon as we're all working together, somebody's going to cheat. Somebody wants to take an advantage. Well, that means there's fear in the system. That's dysfunctional. But if we talk about a system that doesn't have that fear in it, where actually everybody just cares about everybody else, then you care about everybody, but everybody else cares about you. So the whole system is constantly reconfiguring and rearranging itself to optimize the whole, optimize everybody. So, if you imagine a system like that, it'd be pretty wonderful, because suddenly your choices, the things that you could do, the things that you could be, grow immensely. You could just kind of change careers in the middle. One of my examples is, you may be a brain surgeon, and you may do brain surgery, 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. And maybe you'd like to get outside and get some exercise and stay healthier. So you may decide that you're going to haul rocks or, ride on the back of a garbage truck and pick up garbage cans or something on Tuesdays and Thursdays and do brain surgery on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. And you could do that. Or you may just decide that art is your thing and you want to write poetry, or you want to make pictures, or you want to sculpt. Well, that has value to the society. So that would be supported. It's not like, well, that's going to be a hard living. Who's going to pay you to do that? Well, the system, the whole thing would want that. That enriches everybody. So you have so many more possibilities of expanding your, who you are and your capabilities in that kind of a system.
Now,
So
what you're talking about now, is this part of the virtual reality kind of concept, where
Well-
we might sometimes feel like it might be realer than real, yet our interactions in sort of this lucid dream, astral travel state could be realer than real. I don't know if you'd agree with that, but
it is. Well, let's talk about virtual reality, because we're right about at that point now where we need to get into that virtual reality. So we have this larger consciousness system. And this larger conscious system is consciousness. Okay, and consciousness is trying to evolve. And the way it evolves is by lowering its entropy. And lowering entropy means being kind, considerate, and so on, love. So you have all these little individuated units of consciousness, but they're not really learning very much because it's just a bunch of pieces of consciousness chatting with each other. It's like a big chat room. They're not really growing. So the system says, well, what we need here is an environment that has more consequences, an environment that has choices that are, really meaningful, not just chit chat where it really doesn't matter what you say or who you say it to or whether you lie or not. It's kind of irrelevant. You're just in this big chat room. So the system decides that it needs to make a virtual reality for consciousness to play in, because in that virtual reality, it'll have a lot of rules that will create strategies and create, ways to succeed and lots of choices. So the system did that. It started with a set of initial conditions and a rule set. And it said, okay, here's the rule set. Here's the initial conditions, which were, a ball of plasma, high temperature, high pressure, push the run button and let it all change according to the rule set. Well, you recognize that's kind of the Big Bang, but this is the big digital bang, not the big physical bang, because it's all in a computer. It's being computed by consciousness, the information system that can also configure itself as a computer, because that's an information system too. So it can make piece parts of itself a computer, piece parts of itself you and I. So it does that, and it creates this virtual reality, and the individuated units of consciousness, they log on and start playing these characters. And let's talk about virtual reality for our virtual reality games, just to get us oriented as to what really virtual reality is. Virtual reality is a conversation, back and forth communications between a consciousness, an individual, a player, let's call them the player, between the player and the computer. That's all. There really is no virtual reality. It's just virtual. It's just being computed. So we have a virtual reality game, let's say The Sims, and you're the player. As the player, you make all the choices for the Sims character. Okay, so the player makes the choices for the avatar. From the avatar's point of view, the computer that computes that game, the Sims character's point of view, the computer that computes the Sims is non-physical to that avatar's perspective. And the player is non-physical to that avatar's perspective. So that's the nature of virtual reality. You have a player, a computer, and then you have the avatar or the computed figure. And the player and the computer have to be of the same stuff. Now, in our world, that stuff is like atoms, the stuff in the periodic chart. That's what both the computer and the player are. They're made of the same stuff. In consciousness, both the computer and the player are consciousness stuff. All right, so what does that mean to us in a virtual reality? We log on to our body, is the avatar. We are consciousness. We're making all the choices for that body, and the part of the larger conscious system configured as the computer or the server of this virtual reality is computing everything, all the things that happen. It's a big multiplayer game, just like Sims, a big multiplayer game. So that means that we are not our bodies. We are a piece of consciousness, and we're playing a body. Okay, now it has a very unusual attribute here that is important to understanding quantum physics, and that is that notice that the virtual reality exists only in the minds of the players. It doesn't exist anywhere else. It exists only in the minds of the players. Okay, there is no little Sims characters running around drinking beer, at a bar and having jobs and making babies and doing all the things that Sims characters do. They really don't exist anywhere. Those are just computations. The virtual reality exists in the minds of the players. Now, that's true of us too. So who are we? We are individuated units of consciousness getting a data stream from the larger consciousness system in the form of a computer, and it tells us what's going on in our reality. We look at that data and we see rocks and rivers and streams and people and refrigerators and cars, and we see all the stuff that's there because that's our interpretation of the data that we receive. And then we do things. We interact with each other, just like, World of Warcraft or The Sims, and the computer then looks at the results of those interactions based on the rule set, and we get more data, and it's just this interaction between the player and the computer. But the virtual reality, which is our physical universe, that's the virtual reality, exists only in the minds of the players. So why is it that in quantum physics we have this big mysterious observer effect, that nothing really happens, comes into this reality until it's observed by a player? Well, that's because the reality is only in the minds of the players. If a player doesn't get the information to define something in that reality, then that thing isn't in the reality. It only gets to be in that virtual reality because some player got the information and that defined it. You see? So if it never gets to the mind of a player, then it can't be in our reality. That's the reason that we have this observer effect. And when physicists say that, well, you have this wave function, it's a probability function, of course, it's not really something waving. And this wave function collapses and becomes a particle. And you have to look at that and say, what? You've got this probability thing and it collapses and presto changeo, there's a particle? How does that work? What is this mysterious, wave function that upon measurement suddenly produces physical particles? And of course, that's why quantum physics is so weird, because that doesn't make any sense. That's nonsense. Well, it's not like that. That whole idea is that the measurement brings the particle into reality is just a reflection of the fact that the virtual reality, which is our physical universe, only exists in the minds of the players. The players have to get the information. Otherwise, that particle can't come into this universe until a player gets the information. So that then explains this weirdness in quantum physics. It's just a natural aspect. It's a natural part of a virtual reality that it has to work that way. So you see, this concept of virtual reality solves a lot of problems. So here we are, we log on, and when we log on, we just log on a piece of ourself, just a kind of the quality being a measure of entropy, the quality we've learned. We log that on to this human avatar, and then we make all its choices. But when we do that, we do it 100%, so that the only experience we have now is the experience we have through that avatar. In other words, I just take a piece of myself with no memory and log on to the avatar. So without memory, I start creating new memories as soon as that avatar starts having experience, even if that experience is just slushing around in the womb and punching mama in the belly from the inside, or listening to the sounds that are coming from outside. So that is what we are. We're consciousness, making choices. We make these choices because that helps us evolve. If we make our choices based on love and caring and cooperation, we evolve, we grow. Our entropy gets lower. Our quality of consciousness goes up. There's a bunch of words that kind of mean the same thing. If we make these choices based on fear, and fear will lead to things like greed and anger and that sort of thing. If we make our choices based on fear, then we de-evolve. And our life is usually unhappy and dysfunctional when we do that. If we make our choices based on love and caring, our life tends to be pretty positive. And it doesn't really matter about the physical circumstances. It just gets positive, whatever circumstances you're in. So that's kind of how virtual reality, quantum physics, and consciousness all get wrapped up in a model together, where consciousness is the one thing that's fundamental and everything else is virtual. So all of our experience is virtual. So we dream at night, that's another virtual reality. We go out of body, that's another virtual reality. All of these are data streams from the server, from the computer, from the larger consciousness system. So how do you go out of body? Well, you just set aside the data stream you're getting that's defining this physical universe, this physical reality, and instead you grab hold of a data stream, going someplace else, some other reality frame. That's an out of body. That's all it is. It's a shift of data streams. Each data stream defines another reality frame.
If I may jump in real quick, I'm absolutely loving this. So much to cover, so little time. So with this model of the simulation of the virtual reality simulation, for lack of a better word, and signing on to these avatars that we call the human body, and our consciousness streaming through this as we've got so far. So would that mean that the afterlife is very real, as far as we just log off the body and become a part of the larger consciousness system again? How would that work in your model, sir?
Yes, well, it is like that. You as consciousness are immortal. You don't die as consciousness. Your avatar dies. It's just like your sim character dies, or your elf, or your wizard, in World of Warcraft dies. You do the same thing that you do in World of Warcraft. You go get another avatar, or you resurrect the old one, and you get back in the game. Well, you do the same thing here. And that's required because the game is a game of growing up, of evolving. And it's a hard thing to do, because you do that by changing who you are. So you don't just get one shot. If you did, we wouldn't evolve. You can imagine all the plants and animals on our planet. And you said, well, you got one shot to evolve, and you'll either, well, you won't. But evolution is an open-ended thing. It just keeps on going. It's not a one-shot kind of a process. Evolution has to continues as long as there's space to evolve into. So that's the same thing that happens. So here's just a little, we'll just run around that cycle. You have an avatar, the avatar dies. You begin to become aware that you're still existing. It's sort of like the NDE, right? When their body dies on the operating table, and they just become aware, oh, I'm no longer in Kansas. This is someplace else. And then one thing leads to another, and they have some kind of an experience or adventure or some sort of thing. Well, it's like that. And the life you just finished, that lifetime you just finished, starts to fade just the way dreams fade. It's real right there in your face instantly, but then it starts to fade. And, after a little while, you barely remember it. You have to work to remember it. So then you, that part I call a free will awareness unit, which is just a subset of your individuated unit of consciousness that actually logs on to the avatar. That just dissipates. That partition comes down. So now you're just an IUOC wondering what to do next. And what you want to do next is get back in the game so you can make more choices that'll help you grow up and evolve, because that's the fast track. This is an entropy reduction trainer. That is what our physical universe is. It's an entropy reduction trainer for individuated units of consciousness. We're there to learn. That's our point. It's our purpose. So you start to think about what you want to do next, the kind of lessons you need to learn, how it is you have to grow, what are your challenges, where did you fail last time, and then you get back in the game. And when you get back in the game, you take a piece of yourself, your IUOC, individual unit of consciousness. I call that a free will awareness unit. It's just a little subset that represents your entropy gain, or entropy loss to that point, your quality of consciousness. And that little subset, you put a partition down, take this little subset with no memory, and it logs on. And from now on, the computer talks to it. And now it is experiencing being a baby in the womb. So you just go round and round that cycle. It's
And real quick, Mr. Campbell, would you say that every time we return as individual units of consciousness to the LCS, larger consciousness system, would you say that upgrades it just a little bit from all the experience we put into the system?
Well, if we've made good choices, if we have made good choices and gotten rid of some of our fear, some of our ego, some of our beliefs, the ego and beliefs are generated by the fear. So fear is the key thing. It's the fundamental problem. Once we get rid of that fear, then we get rid of our ego, we get rid of those beliefs, and our entropy is lowered. We become a higher quality of consciousness. And when we go back in the next time, we go back in as that higher quality of consciousness. So we don't come back with a memory, but we do go back with the quality that we've earned up to that point. That's what makes it iterative.
Today, in the world that we're living in, we can see the definite differential between the fear that's been out there here recently and the way societies have reacted to it, opposed to the love and coming together. And that's not what we're seeing as much anymore, unfortunately. Even looking at our social order right now, it completely makes a lot of sense. So basing on a social order or a consciousness order, I totally understand there. Let me ask you, you've mentioned a lot of paranormal concepts, and I know you have a deep love for the paranormal like the rest of us. You mentioned OBEs and NDEs, things like that. What about time travel? Within your model, can the past be changed within this larger consciousness system? Can a variable be changed upon evolution like that?
Not in the way I think that you mean. Now, what you can do with the past is a database. Okay, the past is collected as a database, a historical database. And the reason we have that database, the Eastern, I guess, Hinduism started the idea that they were called Akashic records, where all this data is. But basically, the reason that you have to have a database is that the way the system determines what to do next is it takes a random draw from a probability distribution of all the possibilities. That's how it can determine what's next. If something new happens, when that measurement is made, that's how it determines what the result of that measurement is, if it's otherwise unknown. So I just kind of skipped and jumped into that spot. But in order to do that, it has to know what all the possibilities are and what their probabilities are. So it creates this database, so it has all that information handy, because it on the spot has to do that for all the 8 billion of us here as we do things and make measurements and see things and hear things and extend ourselves into new places. It has to do that. So then, as time goes by, that probable future database just turns into a past database, and those two databases. Then they're actually just one database, but those two things, the past and the future databases, that's where the Akashic records come from. And that's why they have to be there. They're an essential part of the rendering engine's ability to render this virtual reality. So all the information is there. And it's there not just in history, not just what did happen, but all the things that could have happened and the probability that they would have happened. So you can go into that past, say 30 years ago, I decided to marry Sally instead of Sue. So now Sally and I have been off and been married for 30 years. And I wondered, wonder what had happened if I'd married Sue instead of Sally. Well, I can go back there and look at all the probabilities and follow those probabilities out and get a sense of what that would have been like. Okay, so I can go back and say, well, what happened if I'd married Sue this time? And sure enough, this probably would have happened. And because of that probably would have happened. And because of those things, this other thing probably would have happened. Now, it doesn't mean that that's exactly what would have happened if I had married Sue. I think Sue was the one that was left out first time. Anyway, it's just the probability of how that would have worked out is what you do. So you can change it in that sense. You can do what-if analysis in those databases, but you don't change it in the sense that you don't change history. History's history. It's done. It's there. So you can't go back and change things like that with the database.
Yeah, because then you start getting into the concept of timeline paradoxes and all those types of things.
Absolutely. Yeah, you get a lot of logical paradoxes if you go there. They just don't make sense. So the past is done, but we can play with it and we can experiment with it, and we can we are consciousness, and that database is being kept in consciousness, so we have access to it. You just have to know how to access that database, but it's all there.
Absolutely. So Tom, we have a few questions for you. We've got one up on the screen right now. We're calling this our question number one. Now, you may not have the answers to these questions, which is totally fine, but we thought we'd ask them to you anyway. This first one gets into the biology of the LCS, or the larger consciousness system, and the PMR, physical matter reality, using your terminology here, related to our mitochondria and how they interact with our avatar body. And for those that don't know, the mitochondria, the powerhouse of the cell, they give each one of our cells all of this energy. Some may describe it as consciousness energy. They have their own DNA, which we normally inherit from our mother. And we were wondering if you had any insights about a possible link to the mitochondria and the LCS.
No, I would say that there is not a link. There is no direct link between those two. Consciousness doesn't have biology. Biology is an artifact of the rule set. Remember, we started with this rule set and a ball of plasma, and we let that evolve. And because of that rule set, we ended up with dogs and cats and, pine trees and us. We all evolved according to the rule set. And that is where our biology is a representation of the possibilities of the rule set, the possibilities that we actually actualized because of our choices and because of the random things that happen to us. Consciousness itself has no space. There's no, it doesn't have a here and a there. Consciousness doesn't take up space. Consciousness just is. So the space is a virtual concept. Space, you create space by taking a point, calling it an origin, and then defining three mutually orthogonal unit vectors at that origin, and that space. And that space to plus and minus infinity in all directions. That's 3D space. So there is no space. That's a computed thing. So there's no biology. All of that is just rule set. It's the actualization of the rule set given the initial conditions and the rule set that defines the virtual reality. So they don't communicate. A lot of people have this idea that we are like a radio system in our consciousness. We tune into it, and then the consciousness comes and gets us. But that's materialism, basically. That's putting the idea, the conscious, whatever, is then a material thing, but it's not. So we're not radio receivers, and parts of our physical body are not getting messages or signals from consciousness. It doesn't work that way. It's just a rule set thing, and consciousness is talking to the player. The player makes choices, and the choices, the things that it can do, are things that are able to do under the rules of the rule set.
Okay. Thank you. We appreciate that answer. I don't know if anyone wants to bring anything else. Oh, Cynthia.
Yeah, I'm popped back in. Sorry about that. Yeah, well, this is interesting, Tom. And I don't know if you're familiar with the microtubule concept that some,
Yeah,
okay.
I am.
So that, what is your take on that? I'm just curious, because that might be viewed as another explanation, if you will, that some physicists are thinking might link consciousness directly to ourselves, which, it's like it's a quest for the Holy Grail kind of a thing. Would you have a similar response to that as you do to
Yes. What that is about is that Scientists are trying very, very hard to make consciousness a physical attribute. The mind is a product of the physical world, the body. And for them, the physical world is fundamental, and consciousness is something created by the physical world. And they dearly want to prove that because they're materialists, and that's a materialist viewpoint. Okay, so the way the reasoning works is that we know that consciousness is non-local in the sense that, it does mysterious things, right? That's sort of the non-local in quantum physics. It means it does things that are not, there's no local physical causality for doing them. So it does these weird things. Well, so here it is like this. Consciousness is non-local and does strange things. Quantum mechanics is non-local and does strange things. Therefore, consciousness must be a quantum effect. Well, the logic there is equivalent to this. Oh, rockets fly and birds fly, therefore birds must be little rockets. Just because they have a characteristic in common that they both are a little strange, do weird things, called non-local, doesn't mean that one causes the other. So how are you going to find quantum effects? So we know we're going to make this consciousness a physical thing, then we need to find quantum effects that do it. And we know quantum effects only take place in terms of little small, tiny things. It's a tiny place in the quantum world. It's not a big macro place. So we start looking for tiny places. And whenever we find a tiny place, we said, aha, look, a tiny place. Therefore, that must be a quantum thing going on that makes consciousness. So it's just a desperate attempt by physicists to try to make consciousness derived from the material world rather than the way it actually works, which is the other way around. The physical world is derived from consciousness. So yes, they're going to work on that, and they'll have all sorts of theories, but it's mostly just, people trying to save materialism.
Thank you. I'm so glad you pointed that out. I couldn't agree more. I just want to bring up one quick other thing. We have a lot of ground to cover, and time is flying. But I love how you mentioned that you can derive all of quantum physics, and I'm also I wrote a paper on that brings up Lucian Hardy's work, where he can come up with all of quantum physics from just 6 simple axioms. But we're not going to go into that. I just want to touch on it briefly because I agree with you that consciousness is fundamental, and quantum physics is showing us things that are a little bit beyond this material framework that we're trying to stuff it into. So thank you so much for bringing up all of this.
Can I just ask, because I don't know, what is, in 30 seconds or less, what is microtubule? I never heard that term before.
Really?
It's part of the structure inside the central nervous system that consists of a large group of compact hollow tubes, if you will, microtubules. And these things are extremely tiny. They're probably down in the numbers of nanometers. They're very, very tiny little tubules. And because they're so tiny, then one says, well, quantum stuff goes on in tiny places. But it's not actually a very good model, because quantum things don't go on in warm, wet places. And inside biology, everything is warm and wet, because quantum states are not stable in warm, wet places. Quantum things are stable at, near absolute zero, liquid hydrogen temperatures, that sort of thing. You get very stable quantum systems.
Well, we actually are seeing some quantum effects in quantum biology, and it's a booming field. There have been a lot of breakthroughs coming through there. But I still agree with you that just because it's a small, tiny place, they're looking in the wrong place.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go on to the next slide. This is about what we're calling glitches in the matrix, including what we refer to as Mandela effects. So we wanted to ask you how you felt about your concept that our human avatar body, if it's vibrating at a lower frame rate, frames per second, than what is projected in front of us, everything looks smooth, everything looks real, realer than real. However, if a human could raise their frequency, they could see glitches in the matrix. Some people see that. Time changes. Cynthia, you've used the term time quakes before. Items disappearing out of our reality. Basically, we are vibrating and see the world around us at a higher frame rate. So the question is this a flaw in the LCS or possibly a design feature to allow someone to begin to awaken within this hologram dream LCS?
Actually, it's neither. It's neither one of those. This idea of seeing, of talking about the human vibrating at a higher or lower frequency, that is a good metaphor, but it's not an actual fact. It's just a metaphor. Consciousness, again, is not spatial. Vibration is a spatial. Vibration means back and forth, moves regularly, in and out. That's vibration, has to be this moving thing. Well, inside consciousness, there is no space. There is no vibration. Vibration doesn't exist. So as a metaphor, the vibration fits pretty well, because we talk about, well, you have vibrations like tuning into a radio station. You have to oscillate at the frequency of the wave that's being sent out from the radio station. And when you do, then you can hear the music. So it's a matter of talking about vibration in terms of, I got a good vibe for that, or my vibration is going up, I understand things better. It's just a metaphor. There really is no vibration. It's simply a metaphor because vibration, has that tuning quality about the word, and people take that, but it's not a physical thing. The human doesn't vibrate. Now, that doesn't mean that those things don't happen. Reality can come and go. There's multiple reality frames, and they can change, and our reality frame can change, and the larger consciousness system has almost complete control over this reality. It's a virtual reality. It's serving the data. It can serve whatever, the server serves the data, whatever data it wants. So if it would like to put, a little green man with pointy ears, in your bedroom at night and have a conversation with him, it can do that. It's just information. You see, so the system can make things come and go and play with the system in many ways. And it has reasons sometimes for doing that. And we can discuss some of those. But so all of those things that people see, the things that people observe are real things. And the vibrational thing is just a metaphor to try to help explain it, but it's not actually how anything works. The vibration is not a mechanism in consciousness.
So would you say then perhaps it's a matter of lower entropy? Would that be a better way to phrase it? That we could then access these states of higher level?
Absolutely.
Time? Oh, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. As you lower your entropy, you gain a bigger picture. You get a larger decision space. You make better choices. You understand things much better. And you gain a lot of capability and access to things as you lower your entropy. That's just part of growing up, and yes, that would be a much better way of saying it, because that's the way it works. As we evolve ourselves and consciousness evolves, all the paranormal things become just available. They're just yours if you want them. You don't have to have them. Paranormal is not important in itself, but if you want to do those things, you can. It's easy. It's just your intuition. Like I say, going out of body requires 1/10 of a second to just shift your phase or shift your attention from one data stream to another. And there you are. It doesn't, there's nothing physical going on. It's not your ectoplasm oozing out of your head and then flying off into the ectoplasm world. Those are things we make up that kind of are physical-ish kind of things that we make up to try to describe it, just like vibration is a physical-ish sort of way we express it. But yes, the paranormal things and what we're aware of just becomes obvious the more you grow up.
And that brings us to our next slide. Our third question for you about vibration. So this was something you've obviously heard of vibrovision, because I know there was a video that I was watching this video about vibrovision because I'm interested in it myself, and all of a sudden I heard Tom Campbell talking, and I'm like, so. But basically, before we ask you this question, we wanted to make sure our audience knew what vibrovision was and so forth. And it was featured in this movie called Superhuman. And there's this like 3-minute excerpt that we want to play from the school there in Utah. So before we ask you the question, we're going to play that video, then we'll get back to you and ask the question.
Okay.
USA in Ogden, Utah, a blindfold technique called vibrovision helps you sense the vibration of various objects in the physical world.
All physical matter in the universe is actually a form of energy that's made up of atoms. And those atoms are cycling or vibrating at a certain frequency. Practicing vibrovision gives us the ability to access our sensors and to perceive those vibrations, and then convert it into a usable mental image we call mindsight.
Red, yellow, blue, yellow, orange, blue, green.
We can see the unseen, to do things that are thought of as impossible.
8 of clubs, 10 of diamonds, 5 of hearts. 1, 2, 3.
At MPUSA, folks of all ages demonstrate these incredible skills inside the academy and out in the real world.
How about the grilled chicken and sausage gumbo?
Gumbo. That's fair.
How much do they cost again?
To $29.98.
Correct. And Colton, what were you just touching?
These are fan boxes.
All right. What color is that?
That's it. Let's find the Lay's brand. Old Spice body wash. Very good.
Whoa.
Okay, to me that's pretty cool stuff.
Yeah.
So what can you share with us about that experience?
Okay. Well, it has nothing to do with vibration or vibrovision or anything else like that. That again is people trying to explain what happens by creating some kind of quasi-physical, arrangement. Oh, it's vibrations. It's not vibrations. There was another group that I was associated with that was in Germany. Matter of fact, I flew over to Germany and took this lady's course, and it was called Seeing Without Eyes. It wasn't called vibrovision. And of course, they didn't talk about vibrations or anything because that's just kind of the local explanation that these folks have that were in Utah. So vibrovision is just a concept they made up in order to explain something they don't understand, which is typical. It's what we do, right? It's what humans do. They come up with stuff to try to explain what they don't understand. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just not fundamental. What's going on here, and with the Seeing Without Eyes, it's basically remote viewing in real time.
That's an interesting way to put it. Okay.
It's remote viewing in real time, and it's not that hard to teach. Now, I took the course to do this because I was interested in how do you teach people to remote view in real time? It's hard enough to teach people to remote view just a picture, much less, real time seeing of what's going on. And I thought, wow, that's a pretty interesting thing. So I took the course, not so much because I wanted to, see without eyes, but I wanted to see how they taught this to people. How is it that they could teach people? Because they take people in a week, and it's hard to teach somebody to remote view anything in a week. But these kids in a week and adults, we had adults in our class that were just like that. There was a lady in our class. She was an elderly lady from Finland, I think, or someplace in north Western Europe. And I took her out for a little walk. She had a blindfold on, and I made sure that blindfold covered every part, and that blindfold, I had one too. So I know exactly how that blindfold worked. And I knew that she could not see a thing. And I took her hand like she was a blind person and said, no, here's a curb, step down, and we did all that. And we walked out down the street, and she was reading license plates, bills that were stuck on doors. She was telling me about the house and what color it was and how many garbage cans were down, at what level, and just whatever, colors of cars, licenses, even the little words across the bottom of the license plate that says, bought by, Jobo Chevrolet or something. And no problem. She could see pretty much as well as I could. And that was after 1 week of training of the Seeing Without Eyes. And they were able to read books. But people make up their own stories. Now, here's an example. When I was taking that course, this lady, Evelyn, had been teaching this course for some years. And as you might think, blind people are interested in this course. And she had taught a blind man to do this. And in his mind, he justified it. And he justified might not be the right way, but he explained it to himself in a way that he could feel through his fingers. So he demonstrated that, and she brought him into the class. This was a kind of a show and tell part of the class. She brought this blind guy in, and he comes in with his cane, and he goes over and he hangs up his coat and hangs up his cane, and he walks over, and somebody got him a book. They went back. There was this little library set up in the back with 100 little books and pamphlets and magazines in it. So they went back and grabbed one and brought it up, and it was a children's book. And they said, can you tell us what's in this book? Because it was a lot of pictures and few words, as children's books are. And he looked at it and he says, oh, this is a giraffe, and the giraffe is doing this, and his name is George. And, he went through and turned the next page. He was telling us all about it. And somebody said, well, how do you do that? And he said, I see it in my fingers. My fingers feel the vibration and the picture, and I feel the picture. I can feel that it's a giraffe. My hands tell me. And they were said, well, if you just look at it and don't touch it, could you tell? And he said, no, I have to put my hands on it. So you see, he had a belief that he had to touch it in order to see it. If he didn't have that belief, he wouldn't have needed to touch it. And he justified it in his own mind as somehow the picture was coming up through his fingers, and he was able to get it. So people make up their own stories about how things work to justify it. What's going on is that they are in an intuitive state, an altered state of consciousness where their intuition is plugged in and connected to the database. Now you say, well, the database, that's history. Yeah, but the history is only 10 to the minus 44 seconds old. So that's pretty current. That's pretty much now. And you can get that data. You can remote view it one site at a time. And if you believe that's all you can do, then that's all you'll be able to do. Just like the blind man needed the hand to touch it.
Does that go back to the variables you were speaking of in the beginning when you were learning the consciousness system and how you were changing up different variables?
Exactly. It did. Yeah. Is this, okay, I can heal in this way, but is that necessary? I get out of body in this way, but is that necessary? Are these just rituals I'm going through out of habit, or are they actually a necessary part of the process? Absolutely. Those are the kinds of things that I studied to find out what is fundamental and what is our overlay on top of that stuff. So a lot of it is overlay. So remote viewers, originally believed that all they could remote view was just places on the earth. They could remote view things. So they could go to the ballpark or they could do different things, and that was it. And they couldn't do anything else because they believed that you couldn't do anything else. And then they started remote viewing the dark side of the moon and other places. And they realized, wow, we can remote view almost anything anywhere. And then they started remote viewing future and started remote viewing past. And they remote viewed the Titanic and you know,
and
that
the
sort of
moon
thing.
and Mars and many other objects. So would you say that them realizing or them deciding that they could do that altered something in the LCS to allow them to do that? That it evolved or upgraded that part? Or
No. It altered something in themselves. What it did is it got rid of a belief. So they just through trial and error, they bumped into these things. And when they bumped into them, because remote viewing at that point was probably 20, 30 years, old, as far as a lot of people were doing it. And somebody said, well, hey, let's try to remote view the sinking of the Titanic. And they did. And oh my God, it worked, you see? And then they told other people. So it was just trial and error, people kind of stumbling into these things. And what they changed was their own belief system. That was what they changed. It didn't change the LCS or any connection like that. It just changed their beliefs about what was possible. And in that course, teaching people to read see without eyes, the one biggest, most central thing in that whole course was just to get past people's belief that it was impossible. That was the key thing. As soon as you get past that belief that it's impossible, well, everything just comes right along very quickly after that. So that was the big key item. And they had some very clever stuff in there to get people past that belief. And that's what, that's kind of what I learned from it was their methods of getting people to let go of those beliefs. Your consciousness, the data's in the database. It's all there for you. All you have to do is get it. You query it with your intent.
And I love that how closely related intent becomes, as we've also seen in both the quantum physics experiments and consciousness overall. We know intent has a lot of purpose upon creation of reality in front of us, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Intent is the prime mover in consciousness. Intent is what moves things. When you heal somebody with your mind, you're modifying future probability with your intent. When you remote view or get data from a database, let's say on somebody's health or see auras or whatever else, you even go into the future, look at future probabilities. Your intent is how you do that. And your intent is what gets you around in those databases and what gets you around in consciousness. The way you shift data streams to go out of body is with your intent. Intent is everything. But the key here, and the reason why so many people have trouble doing it, is that this is not an intellectual intent, right? It's not an intellectual intent at all. It has to be at the being level. It has to be out of the core of you. You have to be it. You can't just think about it. It doesn't work if you just think about it. You have to get into that state where you have a clear, focused connection with the core of who you are, and then all this stuff is possible. And if you're not hung up by beliefs and not hung up by your fears and egos, then you've got carte blanche. You can do whatever you want.
I would like to point out that just came out of the mouth of a very distinguished physicist. And this is things that you hear along the New Age movements and a lot of the, quote, woo-woo guys and things that are ridiculed a lot. So, again, I just want to point out that come out of the mouth of a physicist, a distinguished one at that. So it's really amazing to hear things like that. Thank you, Heather, our amazing producer in the back. She's right on it. Our next question, Mr. Campbell, and I do apologize for the bit of speed we have here, but so much information, so little time. You speak about the management, the big cheese of the LCS. How do you feel about the concept of what some call founders or system administrators of the LCS?
I'm not sure just what they mean by founders or system administrators.
Could somebody expand on that, Chris or Cynthia? You want to expand on the concept before he answers, or?
Yeah, so if you think of the LCS as a sophisticated quantum computer, so to speak, would there be assistants, such as system administrators? Some people in science fiction, they use the term founders or founder races that were responsible for perhaps the design, so forth, of different realities.
No, there are no founders or system administrators. Consciousness isn't just a big machine. Consciousness is conscious. It's aware. It understands. It can configure itself to be the computer, but it can configure itself to be the operating system of that computer. It's the whole thing. The larger consciousness system is basically all there is in our reality. And because we're a piece of it, we can't get outside of that to look back at it from an objective thing and look at its environment. It's everything to us. It's all that we can interact with. So, no, I've never run into any such founders or administrators or anybody else. That's kind of almost thinking that the LCS is just a machine. It's just the computer, and it needs somebody to tell it what to do. It's not a machine. It's conscious. It's aware. It knows exactly what it's doing, why it's doing it, and how it's going to do it.
What about if we switch the wording, call it angels and archangels?
Okay. Now, angels and archangels, again, make good metaphors, but they're not really, what can we say? They're not so much a thing. Let's talk about guides. People have guides. Often they'll call their guides angels. This is a non-physical being that they get information from. They get advice from. They get connections with it. That's just your own personal interface to the larger consciousness system. That is your guide. So consciousness can send you information, and it can send that information to you and wants to speak to you or wants to get some idea across to you or wants to help you out. How is it going to do that? If it appears as a three-headed chicken, talking to you with little squeaky voice, nobody would pay any attention to it. They'd take that image and they'd throw it away and say, "What garbage? I'm watching too many movies." But if it comes to you as an angel, and an angel has a name you recognize, like Gabriel or something like that, or as a saint, or as some religious figure or some guru or somebody with a long beard, like this, has beard, then you take those words and say, "Oh, okay, this is important. I should listen to this." And you make that connection. Or if you're in Asia, it's your grandparents and your great-grandparents and your great-great-grand, it's your ancestors, and they come to you. So the system can communicate to you, send you a data stream in the guise of anything it wants to help you actually receive the data, help you receive the image. So as you run into characters out there, let's say you're in an out-of-body. When you're in out-of-body, that's like a single-player game for the most part. Now, all the characters you run into, most of them are NPCs. They're not other people, they're NPCs. So the system creates the NPCs for you to interact with. For the same reason there's NPCs in a game that we play. It helps drive the situation. It gives you choices to make. It offers you challenges, sends you on a quest, whatever. So well, I guess that means we got to move on.
Well, actually, some of us who are watching this, most of our audience, many of us here, right, talking with you right now, are experiencers of talking. We believe, or I certainly believe, I've spoken, and I do speak with deceased loved ones, and sometimes they tell me things there's no way I could have known, and it's real-time information. Sometimes they're connected, even though they're dead. They're giving me facts that are real-time for that family that are extraordinary, and this happens a lot. It happens. Okay, so that fits in your model.
Oh yeah, it happens a lot. Yeah, there's no problem with that. But what's going on here is that mostly when you talk with dead people, the message isn't for the dead people. The message is for you. It helps you in some way understand something or get a bigger picture, right? It's really about the person here, not really about the dead person for the most part. Okay, now occasionally there's something there for the dead person, but typically it's for the education and the connection and the growth and the opening of the mind of the person who's here. Now, where that information comes from is it comes from the larger conscious system, but it's played, it's constrained to be exactly what that person would say, with the probability that that person would say those things. So you talk to your Uncle Fred, and your Uncle Fred always swore a lot, then this figure's going to swear a lot. Or if he always wears a straw hat, your figure's going to have a straw hat on. Or if Uncle Fred will tell you things about Aunt Susie, who's still alive, and about how he and his wife, Aunt Susie, did this and did that, and tells him a story, you can go then talk to Aunt Susie, and sure enough, that's exactly the way it was. And Uncle Fred can comment on, well, it's good that you bought your little girl a bicycle. She needs that. That'll be good for her. She'll do fine with it. So he can comment on current events. That is the larger consciousness system playing Uncle Fred with the constraints of all the history that defines Uncle Fred. Because in that database is everything Uncle Fred said, didn't say, thought about, things he experienced. Everything is in there. And that history base is the constraint on how the system talks. And mostly, like I say, that whole process is done for the benefit of us, not for the benefit of Uncle Fred. That's typically like that. Yeah, a good friend of mine, Marla Fries, is a medium, and she talks to dead people. She also helps police find out where the bad guys are hiding and where the body is and things like that. So she's very good at it. Talking to dead people, something she's been doing for 30 years. But in any case, we've talked about it, and now that she sees the bigger picture of how it works, it's opened up new possibilities for her. Because once you really understand it, then you don't have so many constraints about what you can do with it and the possibilities that you might do with it. So she's found that it freed her up to do more and be better at it by having a bigger understanding. Now, some people get very upset because they want it to be their Uncle Fred or their loved one or something, and they really get bummed out that you're not going to be, hanging out with your loved ones on the cloud, playing the harp, all having a good time. That's not the way it works, and that's very upsetting to a lot of people. But yes, you would not know the difference between talking to that dead person or talking to that person when they were alive. It is them. In every sense of the way, it is them. Every memory, every thought, every experience, everything. It's them. You can't say, oh, I caught a flaw. It's not really them. No, the system is good. It's only going to work with the data that defines that individual and the way they were, their personality, every piece of it. Now, is that so strange? What are we? We're a piece of the larger conscious system, right? We're just a piece of the larger conscious system. Well, you're talking to your dead person, and what is it? Oh, it's the larger conscious system working through that dead person. And now I'm the larger conscious system working through Tom Campbell, subset. So it's not a whole lot different than what we are. It's the larger conscious system talking through the constraints of a particular subset. Okay, because we're all just pieces of that larger consciousness system. So in a way, it's almost obvious that that's what it is. The consciousness is the only thing that's fundamental there. So when Uncle Fred dies, Uncle Fred's gone, but the data that describes Uncle Fred down to the last gnat's eyebrow is still there and will remain there for a long, long time, as long as there's people who are interested in accessing it. So that's how you talk to dead people. Yes, talking to dead people is a real thing. It's a real experience. And we tend to simplify it and make up things to explain it to ourselves. And
rationalizations.
We make up rationalizations to explain this to ourselves. And that's the thing about this MBT thing, is that once you get it, everything gets so simple instead of all the complication with, well, okay, there's Uncle Fred. And what's Uncle Fred doing when he's not talking to me? You know, where is he? You know, does he have a busy life? How are you doing, Uncle Fred? You have a job? You have another family? What's going on there? And we got all these issues and things that are problematic. We don't know. And Uncle Fred will never tell us things like that. So the idea of, okay, I talk to Uncle Fred when I need to, or I talk to my guides when I need to. And meanwhile, my guides are just hanging out, waiting for me to ask them a question. You know, they're just hanging out. Oh, God, I hope he asks a question. I'm so bored hanging out here. You know, it doesn't, you know, so there's all these other kind of sideline issues when we make up a story to rationalize our experience, where we create a lot of illogical things, you know, that then are problematical for us logically. So
like, I don't have to get upset with my sister and say, well, there's no way my brother was just visiting you in the kitchen because he was just over here while I was making brownies, you know what I mean? So yeah, it does solve that problem that you might see where it's like, oh, well, clearly they were accessible to both of us at the same time for some reason. So
obviously. Yes, exactly. So it just gets rid of all the little problems that you create when you try to make up things that somehow explain our experience. And mostly we make it up based on what we already know from a materialist viewpoint. So they tend to be materialist based explanations, and they generally don't work. But it's much simpler when you see the bigger picture. You don't have all these people just hanging out in nowhere space waiting for somebody to call.
Well, Mr. Campbell, we have discussed a large variety of paranormal this evening or this afternoon, very openly at that. And it's so amazing to discuss that with physicists like Ms. Cynthia Sue Larson and yourself, who are very much more open-minded than the general public. And moving on to the natives are getting a little restless here in the chat. So let's move on to the main focus of what we do is, as you know, the Mandela Effect. And I've seen you over the years. I've seen your opinion grow and change as far as Mandela Effect itself. But instead of saying, you know, Mr. Campbell, what do you think of this? I've got a better idea. We put together some slides and a little bit of audience interaction here with yourself, sir. We would like to just know what you remember opposed to the way things are. So there is an item called stovetop stuffing. Do you remember what company or what do you remember company made stovetop stuffing, sir?
No.
Yeah, and you guys in the chat, you guys chime in if you remember.
No, I don't remember.
That's an honest answer. A lot of people remember it being Stouffer's stovetop stuffing, which I remember Stouffer's stovetop stuffing, I thought, but apparently it's always been Kraft stovetop stuffing. Very small thing, but just the same, not what people remember.
Yeah, by the way, too, I'll interrupt you, Jerry. There's 10 of these that we've put together. So for the ones that you're familiar with, like this one wouldn't make a difference to you because you've never heard of the stovetop stuffing. But for ones that you may know of, like those will have more of an impact. And so it's not just Tom, it's like our audience too. A lot of our audience already knows these. Some might be new.
No, Sandy didn't know. She's like freaking out. She's like, what?
Oh, really?
Yeah, Stouffer's. Yeah, of course it's Stouffer's, right? No, it's not Stouffer's. It's always been Kraft. That's a good one.
So Jerry, you're muted.
Sorry about that. Yeah, well, one thing about us MCs, we have a really big problem using that mute button correctly, I should say. As I'm sure you've experienced in the past, Mr. Tom, with different shows you've done. So next up on the list, we have, you played Monopoly, right, sir?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the Monopoly man, he has certain items that he's known for. Could you describe the Monopoly man to me as you remember him, generally speaking? Like, we ain't got to get in super detail, but generally speaking.
Yeah, and you guys in the chat do that too. Like, if you wanted to be the Monopoly man for, say, Halloween coming up, and you wanted to get a few items to go and look like the Monopoly man, what items might you grab?
Okay, now I draw a blank here too. I have no idea what a Monopoly man is. I played Monopoly when I was a kid. That's about 60 some years ago that I played Monopoly. I'm 77, so yeah, maybe 60, maybe more than that. I played it, and it was a board game, and you jumped your little thing around, and you pass go, and got $200 and things like that. But I have no idea what a Monopoly Man is.
Okay, so Rich Uncle Pennybags would be the Monopoly Man.
Okay, we got a top hat. Somebody saying that's good.
He was known for having the top hat and the cane, and like a very distinguished.
Yeah, the little icon guy that
yes, sir.
probably came with the game.
Yes, sir. Mr. Monopoly. Yes, sir.
Okay.
Okay, yeah, monocle, top hat.
Yeah,
So-
something like that. Yeah, somebody who looked kind of upper scale and ritzy in about 1850. You know, sort of silhouette.
Yeah.
So
Mr.
a lot of
Peanut.
people remember him wearing a monocle, as most of the upper class of that time would have worn. Turns out, if we get the next slide, he never had a monocle. He's always just looked like this.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Again, these seem small, almost insignificant, but how many grains of sand does it take to make a beach, sir? You know. So the next one on our list, this might be something you're a little more familiar with as a science guy, as a physicist. In what arm do you remember the Earth being in the Milky Way Galaxy?
You have to play that Jeopardy music in the background.
Yeah.
See, this is why you negotiate with the guests beforehand to make sure they know these things.
I have no idea.
All right, sir. So a lot of us, and I remember myself, Mr. Sagan saying, we're on the Sagittarius arm of the Milky Way, way out in the edges of the solar system. That's why aliens don't come visit us. We're so far out in the suburbs out here. Again, that's what I remember saying. A lot of physicists at the time and them saying, astronomers, whatnot, we're halfway to the galactic center, what's called the Orion Cygnus arm. A lot of us don't remember that little fact.
Yeah, the spiral arm. That's probably what I would have probably said, Sandy. Yeah, I wouldn't have known this one. All I remember is specifically that we were closer to the edge and we were supposedly way out. I didn't really know the arms or anything, but that seems like way closer to the center than I remember them teaching us.
Okay.
Orion arms. Somebody said.
Are you an avocado fan, sir?
Yeah, I like avocados.
Have you ever heard of HAAS avocados?
Yes.
Could you spell that for me? Do you have any recollection how that would be spelled?
Yeah,
well,
you guys
it's spelled here on the slide as H. Oh, I see. You got it two ways.
Yes, sir. Which one would be correct to you, sir?
Yeah, what you got? And you guys in the chat also chime in with.
I think it would be the AA.
The AAS? Well, as a majority of us do remember the AAS, reality records that it's always been HAAS. I'm sorry, HAAS.
Yeah.
And then
what about you guys in the chat with the Macintosh? Chime with that.
Probably the first one, McIntosh.
Could somebody, Chris, could you take this one? I don't honestly know which one it is.
We'll go to the next slide, which has the answer. So it's in this timeline, it's always been HAAS avocado, not HAAS, and it's McIntosh apple, not Macintosh.
I wouldn't know about the Apple one, but the HAAS looks really weird.
Macintosh with the AC actually seems more right to me. Macintosh actually does not. But Mr. Campbell said he remembers, or seems Macintosh seems more correct to him. And that's perfectly fine. There is no wrong answer here.
There's no wrong answers.
No wrong answer.
No wrong answers.
It's just what do you remember opposed to what reality records it.
Yeah, now the HAAS looks good too. That looks
just jump timelines.
Yeah, that's happened sometimes. That's weird. Yeah, it happens.
Yes, sir. You remember, I'm sure, certain dates in history like 9/11, certain things we know what we were doing, where we were when they happened. Do you remember the JFK incident, sir?
Yes, I do.
How many people were in that car when the JFK incident occurred, sir?
Well, there was obviously a driver and JFK and his wife and a guy from Texas. governor or senator or somebody.
Right.
Let's see if anybody else was in the car. What was that? 4, I guess I just named.
Yes, sir. So that,
Yeah, you
so
guys chime in the
remember
chat.
those. I remember those 4 because they made news. They, so that's the only 4 that I remember. They're.
well, I love that, sir, because you remember what the majority of everyone I've ever known remembers. However, if we could get to the next slide, 6 people were in the JFK car, sir, which I don't remember there being 6. I remember there being 4. It was JFK and Jackie, Governor McConnell and his wife, Secret Service driver, and agent.
Okay.
So a lot of people don't remember 6 people. They remember just 4.
Having two ladies in there is probably the biggest the biggest thumb.
But then those 4 were the ones that all the news stories were about. The other 2, the Secret Service and the youngster, they didn't really get reported on a lot.
Yeah.
Do you remember where you were when you heard the news about JFK?
Do I?
Yeah, I'm just curious.
Yes, I was at college, and it came over a TV set in the fraternity house, and I and 4 or 5 of my fraternity brothers got in a car and drove to Washington, D.C.
Wow,
That's interesting. I wasn't alive during that time, so I can't really speak much past what I've been taught, of course. How about Star Trek? Are you a Star Trek fan, sir?
Yeah, not seen it for a long, long time. Again, my Star Trek goes back probably 40, 50 years, but
that's perfect.
So the opening line, space, blank final frontier. What would go in that blank, sir?
The final frontier?
That would make actually. Before we give the answer, just make sure we have a video. We actually have the original Star Trek video.
Yeah, and you guys chime in the chat.
Yeah, chime in on the chat too. So
what word goes in there? Space, blank, final frontier. What do you remember? Okay, yeah, we got some people putting the. That's what Tom's guess was. Right?
Well, that just makes good English
sense, right?
Should we play the clip? Let's play the clip and see what it actually is.
Seem to be having some technical difficulties on the clip here. Apologies, sir. Happens every now and then with the wondrous technology. Thank God the LCS system's a little better put together right now.
Space, the final frontier.
No, if you listen to it, it says a final frontier.
Yeah. All right.
I don't remember it being A. That's what it says, though, isn't it?
Nobody said A. Everybody said the.
Everybody, and everybody remembers space, the final frontier.
Yeah, that's right.
It's funny. I was researching this, and in 1979, I think it was, Star Trek: The Motion Picture came out, and in the introduction, it says "Space, the final frontier." So we have this concept we call residue, where people remember things a certain way, and then that gets, depending on what happened with the what we call timelines, it has a direct effect onto that. So, yes, this is a minor one, but let's go on to the next one.
Do you are you an I Love Lucy fan, sir? Again, I know that's an older show, but did you watch that?
When I watched I Love Lucy, they were the firsts. They weren't reruns.
You watched the original episode.
I watched many of the original episodes with my family, but that's back in the late 50s.
So when Ricky would come into the house, he would yell something to Lucy when she was in trouble. Lucy, you got some. Do you remember that line, sir?
Splaining to do.
You got some splaining to do. That's what I remember. What about you?
What do you guys remember in the chat? You guys remember?
Bill Knight, this is live. Absolutely, sir. For those wondering, this is not pre-recorded. Yes, guys, we are absolutely live.
Unless you're watching this later.
Unless you're watching it on demand, then we may not be live at that time. Maybe you can learn to time travel in the LCS.
What is time? What is linear time?
Next, the phrase "you got some splaining to do" was never spoken in that show, according to any history. I can't find anywhere where there's any clips of Ricky actually saying, "Lucy, you got some splaining to do."
That's a good one.
Yeah, it's one of those things that people remember. So it's like, how do you misremember a statement like that, right?
Well, yeah.
Maybe that's a carryover from another comedy that was out just a little later called The Honeymooners, where Jackie Gleason was Ralph Cramden, and I can't remember the other characters, but
maybe he said it in that.
Yeah, so it maybe got confused with a similar kind of comedy.
That's weird, but I can't find any evidence. Like when you type into Google, "you got some splaining to do," if it was like the honeymooners, for instance, it would say, "Oh, you're looking for the honeymooners," or "you're looking for," it wasn't Lucy. I personally cannot find any evidence where it's even said in that show, sir.
Oh, even in that show saying it? Yeah.
And just the way he said it too, with that Hispanic accent, "you got some splaining to do."
Right. And I love remember that. So go on to the next slide. We are so short on time right now, so we are going to rush these just a little bit. Who said elementary, my dear Watson?
Should be Sherlock Holmes.
Yes, sir. I love how he threw the "should be" in there. He's not as confident anymore in reality. I love that. So if we go ahead and get the answer, Sherlock Holmes by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle never used that phrase. He used variants of, but never was the phrase elementary, my dear Watson, ever used in a Conan Doyle book, excuse me.
Let's see.
Which is absolutely mind-boggling. Again, kind of rapid fire here, sir. Again, I apologize for the speed. Are you a James Bond fan?
Oh, yes. I've watched them all, but just once and a long, long time ago.
So you're familiar with Moonraker then, with the guy with the metal face, right?
Metal teeth, right?
The name, I remember the name, but I don't. I remember.
The character was Jaws.
Yeah,
Jaws. Great big huge guy.
And he fell in love with a girl named Dolly, right?
No, that I don't remember.
Okay. So I don't want to get too specific here. You know, you said you admittedly haven't seen that in a long time. There was a very famous scene where he falls in love with a girl named Dolly, and they have something in common. Him having metal teeth. She was a blonde girl that a lot of people remember having braces. They had that interaction. They had the metal teeth together, you know. So they had a commonality with each other. In reality, that scene makes no sense now because she smiles as regular teeth and all of a sudden they fall in love for no reason whatsoever.
Yeah.
So again, really, really strange. Were you a Richard Simmons fan, sir? You remember Richard Simmons of the 80s?
Richard Simmons?
Yes, sir.
The exercise guy, right?
Never heard of him.
Sweating to the oldies.
Never heard of him. So we're going to skip Richard Simmons with it. A lot of people remember him wearing a headband, just like the classic 80s, you know, exercise guys, and had the headband and in reality now he's never wore one. So that's 10 different things that the majority of the chat room here, as we see, and of the people experiencing the Mandela effect have strong memories of all being the exact same way. It's not like they said he wore toesies or something and not a headband. You know, everybody remembers the headband. Everybody remembers the monocle. Everybody remembers Lucy, you got some splaining to do. Everybody remembers these things a certain way, opposed to the way reality now records them. And that is the basis of the Mandela effect. So moving to the last slide here in this, could our IOUC, the individuated unit of consciousness, or us as individuals within the LCS, have experienced a different history file from the historical database, and therefore it manifests as what we call Mandela effect in our reality?
I would say no, it's probably not the way it works, but it doesn't mean that it isn't a real effect. I think there's other explanations for it besides that. I thought about it a little because I knew that's what, you know, you guys were about. And I kind of found 4 different things that contribute to it. So I don't think it's just a thing. I think there's several things that lead us to this. Now, the first one was just the idea that there isn't, what I talked about, that reality is only in the mind of the observer. Well, every observer has his own reality because it's his interpretation of the data that he gets. So for one, there is not a reality back then that existed. There is no master reality that exists. It only exists in the minds of the players, and the players all have a somewhat different reality because they interpret the data they get. So there isn't a reality that is kind of the right answer. So that's one thing, so just looking from a perspective of consciousness, there is no the reality that doesn't exist, never has existed. It's a bunch of individual realities. And now we can look at it and see what we, in general, most of us, saw or heard. But so there's that idea that there is no right answer to what it was. We all have our own reality. The next two things, that was the first one. The next two things that came to my mind had to do with the way consciousness perceives. It's attributes of perception. So those are kind of, physical things. And then the last one was basically a paranormal thing. Sometimes the LCS can change things up on us just to get our attention and open our mind. It likes to do that. For instance, crop circles. You have crop circles, and overnight, one night, totally dark, maybe a few lights running around, no sound. And the next morning, you've got 35 acres covered with a very complex design that isn't just straight lines. It's all kinds of curves and things that would probably take a surveying crew of 20 people like 3 weeks to lay it out with their transoms if they were trying to do it. So the system does things like that just as wake-up calls. Hey, think out of the box. Reality is not just this little thing you think it is. Open your mind. There's more going on here than you're aware of. Well, again, we jump to conclusions and make up the first thing comes to our mind. Oh, aliens did it. The aliens must be doing those things. Well, not necessarily. The larger conscious system triggers lots of people with paranormal experiences just to open their minds. I got triggered to open my mind with an ability to, debug software. Other people, I know a lady who a week after her mother died, she got a phone call from her mother. The phone rang, she picks up the phone, and it's Mom telling her that I'm okay. I just wanted to let you know everything's fine. And of course, she was freaked out. So she took the phone and slammed it down onto the receiver because she thought somebody was messing with her and what a cruel joke it was. And then she realized that wasn't the case at all. She just hung up on her mother who was trying to get in touch with her. So people have these kinds of things. The system goes out of its way to help us see bigger pictures, because only when we see bigger pictures do we start becoming seekers and start learning and growing. And, so the system does that all over. So part of the Mandela Effect, that was my fourth one, is that the system often plays these sorts of games just to rattle us a little bit, to get us to open our mind and think out of the box instead of just being stuck in this little materialist groove. And it just does that to individuals, and it does that, like in crop circles, to to whole populations. And it does other things as well. So a lot of the extraterrestrial things that people see, with spaceships landing in their yard and chatting with aliens and so on, all the system has to do to create that is put that data in their data stream. That's it. And then it's there. It's real. They interpret it, and it wakes them up. And after that, they're different people. They start researching. They start wanting to understand things. So that's part of the Mandela Effect. And I think the two things that have to do with perception is that we perceive things and remember things in our memory. This is just kind of the fundamentals of the way consciousness works. We work with pattern matching. That's kind of the fundamental way we do things. We work on pattern matching. And what happens is we'll get a new image. We'll go into our data bank to find a pattern that fits it. Now, if we can find an exact fit, oh, great, we'll put that out. But if we can't find an exact fit, we'll pull out anything that even fits a little bit. If it fits, sort of fit, well, we'll pull that out. And that's what it'll be. My wife's name is Pamela. It's not a very common name. And almost every time we go out and meet new people, she'll introduce herself, I'm Pamela Knight. And within a couple of minutes, somebody says, oh, Patricia, what about so-and-so? They call her Patricia. Well, why is that? Because they both start with P and they both end with the Have you ever seen that thing comes around the internet? You got a bunch of words and they have the first two letters are correct, the last two letters are correct, and it's just random gibberish in between, and you can read it. You can read it without any problem because you're pattern matching, and you get a pattern that's close, and that's it. So because that person probably knew a bunch of Patricias, but didn't know any Pamelas or wasn't familiar with it, then the Patricia pattern was firm and strong. So he hears Pamela, he turns it right into Patricia. And if you ask him about it, he'd say, oh, I'm sure you said Patricia, because that's what he heard. That was his interpretation. So we have, our memories are pretty plastic. We can convince ourselves of all sorts of things that aren't true. We have any number of people who were falsely accused of doing things just because it was a faulty memory, particularly if the rememberer is a child. So memory's kind of plastic. We can twist and then believe in the things that we make up, and they become real to us. But mostly it's this pattern matching thing. So let's say another one of those Mandela things that I heard of long ago, probably the first one I heard was the Berenstain and Berenstain.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. At the time that they came out, I've got those books. I read them to my children, and I heard it wasn't stain, it was steen, like everybody else thought. But I can understand that because at the time, there was a very famous conductor, Leonard Bernstein, and there was other Bernsteins around that were, kind of in the public eye. So everybody had heard Bernstein. That's a pattern. So when you see Bernstein, just like Pamela, you turn it into Patricia. You turn it into something that's more familiar with you. So that's one of the things is the fact that our memory works on pattern matching. Right. And we match the best pattern we can. And then our reality is created by our interpretation. So it's our interpretation that this is the way it was. That my wife did say Patricia. Damn it, he heard her. He heard her say Patricia. That becomes our reality. So that's part of it too. So I think you got all these things together. Our mind is our memory is very plastic. We can remember all sorts of things. Another thing that we should think about that's in this thing too is there's a thing called collective consciousness. Collective consciousness is any group of people who have a connection, who feel they have a connection together, they basically form a collective consciousness. So you have a collective consciousness with your where you work, with all the people you work on. If you're an IBMer, then there's a collective consciousness that goes with that. Or if you do childcare, there's a collective consciousness that goes with that. You have a collective consciousness with your nation. You have one with humanity. Carl Jung called these archetypes. They're basically collective consciousness pieces that you identify with and you connect. Well, the collective consciousness is just the vector sum of all the consciousnesses that are in the membership, that are in the group. So you get stuff out of that collective consciousness and you take it on. So, you become more like that. Now you affect the whole, but you only affect the whole a little bit because you're one person and there's maybe 10,000 in your collective. So you don't affect the whole that much, but the whole affects you more. So you work for IBM, and after you've been there 4 or 5 years, guess what? You start wearing blue shirts. You start, you start dressing like they do. You start talking like they do. You start having the same interests that they do, and you become one of them because it's part of the collective consciousness. So if we have a whole bunch of people who were very familiar with Bernstein and weren't all that familiar with a Bernstein, because that's kind of odd, then that becomes part of the collective consciousness. And, people who weren't even born then or never saw the books, they may also get Bernstein out of the collective consciousness, even though they weren't connected. So these are just a bunch of kind of piece parts. And if you take all of those piece parts and put them together, I think you have the Mandela effect. It's a little bit of all of them. It's some stuff. Sometimes the LCS is doing wake-up calls for us, just trying to shake us up a little bit to think out of the box. Other times it's because of our pattern matching. Other times we get it out of the collective consciousness. Collective consciousness creates fads. Why else would 100 people line up at a store at 5 o'clock in the morning to get a Beanie Baby? Collective consciousness makes that connection of all those people, and pretty soon you have to have one, even though if you were rational, you'd say, well, it's just a little bit of nothing. It isn't much at all. And you're going to pay, $100 for that Beanie Baby, even though it only costs, $1.50 to make. So that's collective consciousness. So you have that, you have the
brain elasticity, collective consciousness, the LCS, and what was the fourth one, sir?
It's your pattern matching.
And pattern matching.
And the very first thing is it's wrong to assume that there is that there is a master reality someplace. There isn't. There's 8 billion individual realities, and each one of those 8 billion individual realities share some things in common. And then the things they share in common become part of a collective consciousness. So if you take all of those things together, I can see how the Mandela effect is a thing. I can see how that it affects a lot of people differently, because the people that got tricked on this one didn't get tricked on that one, and it's very individual. It's not just that everybody falls in the same boat, because some people never heard of Leonard Bernstein, so Bernstein was just as much of a pattern as the Bernstein, because they never had that. But at that time, in the 50s and 60s, when those books came out, that wasn't the case. Bernstein was a famous guy. He was a famous name. And I think there were some other Bernsteins in vaudeville and the entertainment industry as well. So that's a strong pattern. You put it next to a weak pattern, and 20 years later, the weak pattern disappears. Only the strong pattern remains. So that's some of the things that I think come together to make this Mandela effect. And it's all of those. It's not just one of them, but they all work together. So that's my sense of what the Mandela effect is all about.
I appreciate that in-depth explanation, sir, because you have went a step further than I. Myself, being the theory guy for the Mandela effect when it first came out, and I started my YouTube channel, I always focused on individuated ideas, and I love the fact you contemplated this to the extent you've come up with a list of different attributes that could be all working together to create this. Absolutely amazing, sir. I appreciate your work so very much. We have a couple minutes left for questions. I would like to throw in a bonus. You mentioned earlier, if you build it, they will come. And I had a big grin on my face when you said that, because as I've looked back on myself, I remember that being a part of that movie. Would you be surprised to know that that line was never said? It's always been, if you build it, he will come, and that's it. So just a little bonus there. The chat wanted me to throw that at you. But do we have any questions from the panel? We are running a little short on time. I do apologize to the chat. There's been so much information tonight. I don't think we're going to have the time to go through another half-hour Q&A as we had originally planned. But if anybody here on the panel has any questions they would like to touch on before we close out, Chris, Shane, Cynthia, floor is open.
I just wanted to comment about one thing, and that is the one Mandela effect that Tom Campbell seemed to understand or that we all have in common was from I Love Lucy, right? Lucy, you've got some splaining to do. But that was a reality that never happened. So it's very fascinating how people can have this group memory of something that just never ever happened. So I just wanted to point that out. Because that's what a lot of Mandela effects come down to, where there's a big group of people that remember something a certain way, but it's never been that way.
And this is
like the
backed
Beam
by
Me Up
physics.
Scotty was another one. We didn't talk about that one.
Oh yeah, in Star Trek, yeah.
There are a ton.
There's
What
a ton of them.
I love the idea from quantum physics that that quantum physics forbids a single history, and I love the way we've got some experiments that have been documented in 2019 showing that subjective realities appear to be, in fact, the truth. That just as Tom was saying today, that's the case, not objective reality. I believe we're going to get more and more backing and validation of what we're talking about today.
And again, I can't get over how in-depthly enthralled I am in all your work, sir. I appreciate you being here. On behalf of Chris and Shane and Cynthia, I know I speak for everyone. I say it's an honor and a pleasure to have you here, Mr. Campbell. Is there anything you would like to give our audience? Any last comments or anything you'd like to express to them before we get how to get to your stuff?
Your website too, if you could mention how people can get a hold of your books and find out more.
Okay. Well, I have a website, which is www.my-big-toe.com. My events, which is, or things I do, programs I put on, places I go, although not so much since COVID's been around, but we do it on Zoom instead. That is www.mbt.events, but you'll find really most of my work on YouTube. Every time I do a program anywhere, I try to videotape it or, videotape, right? That's old guy, right? Old guys say things like videotape. And
I still say film it for the record.
So anyway, we try to get the video and put it up on YouTube. So there's literally thousands of hours up there. But the good news is now we have a way to search it by subject. So if you go to my website and look at video, there's a little thing up at the top of the page that says video. Click on that and you'll find a tool and you can put in any subject and it'll go through all, 2,000 hours of video and just bring back the little snippets that are what you typed, that are relevant to what you want to know. So that will help there. I guess the last thing that I would say is that I'm just in a process within another, a couple of weeks, hopefully a month at the latest, putting out a new product to help people go out of body, remote view, do paranormal things. I've tried to teach a lot of people. Some of my courses are just showing people how to do it because I tell them if it's not your experience, it's not your truth. So they say, well, then help me get the experience. So I've been teaching them to do paranormal things. But so many people get hung up because of their beliefs. They get in the way and their intellect just won't let go. And they'd like to get into that intuitive space, but that intellect won't allow it. The intellect's just in charge. So I came up with a little tool set of how to get around that problem of the intellect getting in the way, getting into an intuitive space and being able to do that when you want to. And it's a little thing called Tom's Park. And it puts you in a situation where you engage all of your senses. You start out with it being an imagination. And then the imagination turns into an out of body or some other sort of thing in the process of it. So it's a kind of an easy way that you start with something that is okay. You're okay with your intellect. It's an imagination, and it just automatically works into something else. So that's coming out shortly. That's kind of what I've been working on in the last few months. So all of that, of course, there's books. Now my books are free on Google Books. If you don't want to pay for them, you can always go to Google Books and read them there, or they're everywhere that you normally buy books. Just My Big Toe.
To go back to the one you say you've been working on, is that going to be an audio product or an app or what?
It's going to be all of those. It's going to start out as an ebook, and a paperback book, and then it's going to go to an audiobook. So it'll be in all three of those formats, actual paper, an ebook, and an audiobook.
And ladies and gentlemen, may I suggest that if you are interested in what you've heard here today, we've only just barely touched the tip of the iceberg for everything that is available for the My Big Toe, your entire model in theory. I listened to a good, 4 or 6 hours, something like that, of your work just preparing for this, not to count the work I've followed for many years. So absolutely amazing. I would definitely suggest anybody, if you've got time, if you've got maybe a long ride or something you want something to listen to, definitely check out My Big Toe and Tom Campbell's work. Tom Campbell's work. Apparently my tongue has decided it is about done for the day. I really, really, really enjoy it. I think you guys would too. On that note, ladies and gentlemen, we do have to cut it out of here. We're going at 2.5 hours so far. So, Tom, thank you so very much for being here, sir, with us. Honor and a pleasure on behalf of IMEC, Christopher Anatra, Shane Robinson, Cynthia Sue Larson, and myself, Jerry Hicks. I very much appreciate you, sir, for joining us. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for the invitation. I enjoyed it. Sorry that I had to talk so long and speak so fast, but when you have a theory of everything, it's really hard to say everything in just a couple of hours.
Right.
Well, you are more than welcome to come back, Mr. Campbell. We would love to have you back on if you're open to the idea.
Anytime.
Okay. Yeah. Well, maybe
Thank
we
you
could
so
just
much.
talk a little bit more about the Mandela Effect then.
That would be amazing, sir.
Yeah. Okay.
So we will definitely get together and get that scheduled. Ladies and gentlemen, Tom Campbell, presented by the International Mandela Effect Conference. So we got a couple of things to get out of the way real quick before we close out. Ladies and gentlemen, we are a 501c3 non-for-profit organization. If you are super chatting, if you are super stickering, if you are donating to us in any way, that is tax refundable. So make sure you keep your receipts on that. We do appreciate any of the support you give us, and the best way you can support us is not financially, ladies and gentlemen. Just share this out. Get the information out. Get the word out that we exist, that we're here, that we're doing these things and having these mini conferences and bringing amazing physicists like Mr. Tom Campbell on with us, to name a few people, Miss Cynthia Sue Larson, and all of us, together doing this. So tax deductible. Thank you, Raider Champion. I knew I messed that word up. Again, the tongue has decided it's almost through today. But ladies and gentlemen, if you are interested in helping us out, supporting us, again, you can financially, and that is tax deductible, or share us out. Let the people know we exist. On behalf of Shane, Unbiased and on the Fence Robinson, Christopher, Quantum Businessman Anatra, Cynthia, Reality Sliders Sue Larson, Cynthia Sue Reality. I told you it's done today. It's not cooperating anymore. RealityShifters.com, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of these fine folks and Mr. Tom Campbell, we thank you for being here. And remember, until next time, together we go, together we grow. Thank you, everybody.
Love you guys.
Bye. Love you.